So good morning, everyone. My name is Laura Schramm, and I'm one of the assistant directors at the Center for Research on Learning and Teaching. Thanks for joining us for this event, Engaging the World from Your Classroom. The purpose of this event is to highlight efforts on campus to provide significant global experiences for students in the context of their coursework, to provide faculty and staff with the opportunity to share their experiences, and to encourage discussions on campus about this topic. The agenda for our panel is as follows. First, Vice Provost for Global and Engaged Learning, James Holloway, will share some opening remarks. And then I'll be moderating a panel of 4 faculty members. We're pleased to have Carlos Xavier Rodriguez from the School of Music, Theater, and Dance, Norma Sarkar and Rose Ziemba from the School of Nursing, and Luis Spirit-Yunis from LS&A Sociology, and he teaches until 10, and I was told he will answer every last student question after class, so he might arrive a little late, but it's just because of his teaching schedule. Each of them will be sharing about their courses in which they have successfully engaged students in global learning experiences. We'll save some time for a question and answer from you all after the presentations. And finally, Moni Dressler from LS&A Instructional Support Services will share and answer any questions you have about instructional support resources across campus for those who are interested in implementing these pedagogies in their own classrooms. You had on your chair 4 handouts. I wanted to just identify what those are for you. First is just the agenda for today, which lists our faculty, panelists' names, and departments. And then on the bottom, there's some information about this afternoon's events. Second is a list of our poster gallery presenters. So if you are staying to chat with them, we have many other faculty doing this kind of work. So you can kind of look at the types of projects that we'll be presenting there. Then you have a flyer for the Internationalizing the Curriculum grant. This grant funds both courses and curricular initiatives that expand and enrich international themes. The flyer describes the grant in greater detail, and more information is available on CRLT's website. 2 of our panelists this morning received the grant for their course, and several other grantees will be presenting in the poster gallery this afternoon, and we just wanted to encourage you all to apply or share with faculty in your department who might be interested. Lastly, there's an evaluation, and at the bottom you'll see there's space if you would like information about or instructional support. You can kind of share your name and contact information with us. I'll also be distributing a handout for Moni later when she gives her remarks, so we'll just pass that through the crowd. I was reminded to ask people to turn off their cell phones. I realized I had mine on, so if you would not mind doing that, that would be great. And without further ado, I am going to turn the podium over to Vice Provost James Holloway.
Clapping because I'm turning my cell phone off. Well, I'm only silencing it, actually, I'll be honest. So welcome to Engaging the World from Your Classroom. I'm really thrilled to be here, and I'm even more thrilled to see so many dedicated faculty and staff here to spend some time thinking about, talking about, considering this topic. So good morning, I'm James Holloway. I'm Vice Provost for Global and Engaged Education. And this is a bit of a challenge. As a rule for an early morning talk, one should be inoffensive, and so one shouldn't talk about religion or politics, but I'm going to talk about politics and religion. And, well, actually funeral practices. But so last week, Thomas Duncan got on an airplane in Liberia, and he arrived in Texas, and he got off that airplane, and subsequently this week, he was diagnosed with Ebola. As far as we know, he's doing okay at present, but he's quarantined. The ambulance that he was brought to the hospital in is quarantined pending decontamination. There are 12 to 18 other people with whom he's been in contact who are being monitored. 5 of those are children. One additional person is now being monitored as possibly infected that he was in contact with. So this is scary stuff. The people of Dallas are concerned. The people of Dallas are facing their concerns, and especially they're facing their lack of knowledge about this illness. As a country, we're facing our lack of knowledge both about this illness and about the place from which it comes. And we're facing our ignorance about how the people there live their lives, how they structure their lives, about their religions, about their politics. All of this concern because a man got on a plane in Liberia. So we say that all politics is local, but in the 21st century, the global is local. And so for our students, this is a huge and important concern. At least 2 groups of students this summer did not go to Liberia and Sierra Leone because of this epidemic. Again, the global becomes local. Within these impacted countries, there are efforts to stop the outbreak of Ebola. And these run counter to local funeral practices, the practices of washing the bodies, of kissing the bodies, of touching the bodies, of spending long periods of time with the bodies of the departed. These are strongly held practices on funeral rites about how to properly care for and respect those who have passed. And yet this is all happening when the viral load in those bodies is at its very highest. So this is a global challenge. This is just one example of a global challenge in which the local customs and values, the local politics, the local political processes, all of these things come into play in complex ways. And it's only one such example. It's a current example, but there are many others. For our students, coming to understand how these differences are important, coming to understand the roles of nationalism, of pride, of values, and of conflict, these are critical issues that they need to understand and engage to be citizens in the 21st century. This is our challenge then as a university. This is why it's so important to us to find ways to internationalize, to globalize, to make relevant to our students the global sphere in which they live, and to do that within our curriculum in a central and core way. Not as a peripheral, not as an add-on, but as a central core piece of what we do as an institution. So how do we get there? This is a big challenge. One of my goals is that half of the undergraduates at this university should in fact have a meaningful international experience abroad, in person, on the ground. These experiences can teach students to be more creative, more innovative, more effective communicators, better collaborators. They can teach them to develop grit and persistence. They can teach them the desire to do good, the desire to understand the opportunities that the world presents, and to make good on those opportunities. These are very important experiences for our students. But as local is now global, the world's still big, and Liberia is still harder to access than East Liberty Street. And so we also have to take advantage of what we can do here in our classrooms, using technology, using our classrooms being here and in place with people interacting. And so we need to use technology to connect our classrooms here to classrooms and students and learners in other places. That's part of what some of these projects you'll hear about today do. We also need to take advantage of and think about how we take our existing classes and where do they have international connections? Where are there unexpected international connections? And it's easy in a language class. It's easy in a class on global politics. But where in that class on chemistry, on thermodynamics, in calculus, can we find those global connections? Often they're there if we look and search. And it's very important that we actually present them. It's important that students hear about global and international issues consistently, pervasively, throughout their time here, not from selected classes that have an international label, but from the entire educational experience here. That's the world they live in. It's the world we need to create here. Equally, we need to think about how are we taking advantage of the presence of so many international students and scholars on our campus. Where do they connect to, plug into, contribute to the course experiences that we create here? There's a huge opportunity here that we haven't really fully engaged. As we create these international experiences in our curriculum, in our courses, we also have an opportunity to make good on that other goal, to have our students engage physically abroad. Because there's no more powerful a message to a young student than having a faculty member in class say, you should go abroad. You need to engage with the world. You need to spend time in Ghana. You need to spend time in France. You need to spend time in India. You need to spend time in Brazil. There's no more powerful a way to deliver that message than for a student to hear it from their professor in class, not as an add-on, not as a side piece, but in the core central function of the university in our delivery of curriculum. So I think everyone here is already dedicated to this process, this task. That's why you're here. The topic was intriguing to you. You understand the importance of helping our students gain that global perspective through their coursework here, through the use of technology to connect them with others in other places, and through our ability to send them physically to those other places. What we need to do is be the proselytizers, the priests. This is the religious part, if you will. We need to go out and take that message to our colleagues and share it and help them find ways in which they can similarly engage their students in global experiences, in global learning, in intercultural understanding, in international understanding and international affairs. This is critical and key to what the university does in the 21st century. So I'm really looking forward to hearing today about how some of our colleagues have done this, and I know you're going to find it a really interesting program. So thank you.
We're going to turn things over to Carlos Xavier Rodriguez.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm going to try to do this without clearing my throat or coughing. I'm having a little bit of trouble. I've been congested for a while, and I went to the doctor, and she said that I'm allergic to something in my house. And I'm pretty sure that it's me that I'm allergic to, because I've looked and ruled out everything else. Okay. I would like to talk a little bit about my Music Education 502 class, which is the History and Philosophy of Music Education. And several years ago, I wonder if I can, there we go. Several years ago, I decided that I would like to interact with Andreas Lehmann-Wurmser at the University of Bremen. And we talked about how we both had kind of a similar class, and I had been there a few times to lecture and realized that we could actually do an online course and do it synchronously, and our students could interact with each other, and we could interact with them, and we could take turns lecturing. And I thought that it would be something that was really good for my students. I, as an undergraduate, went to live in Copenhagen for a semester, and I'd never even been on an airplane before. When in my junior year of college, and I went there and lived there for half a year, and it was remarkable for me to understand the different ways to look at things. You come back to the United States and you have a totally different perspective of who you are, what your culture is like. People's perceptions of Americans from the other side is unique. And Andres and I were both convinced that this would be good for our students collectively. This is Andreas. And he's a really, really serious fellow. He's very scholarly, has done a lot of publishing and a lot of lecturing. He's a very warm person, though. Whenever I'm there at Christmas time, I usually go at the end of the semester in the fall. He always bakes cookies for his students and rides his bike to school, and he's just has them over to his house and has fires, and he's just a very warm human being. He's a very good person to work with. The first thing that we had to do was we had to develop a memorandum of understanding between the two universities, and it took some doing. We had never done this in the School of Music, Theater, and Dance before, so it had to be scrutinized very carefully by the dean. And then there were the lawyers who had to look at it and make sure that there's a lot, and we had to make a lot of changes. And Andreas was frustrated that it wasn't open-ended like the University of Bremen wanted it to be, which is where we could do this course. We could also do research. We could exchange students, actually have them set foot on the ground in another country. The lawyer said the first thing to do is just to do the course, and then we'll take it from there. So we did. And then, of course, we came down here to, I took part in this global video conferencing seminar and workshop, and met Philomena and Todd, who are back there with the neon green stickers on them that say, "Ask me a question." There they are, right there. And they've been, needless to say, instrumental in making this thing work, taking care of all the logistical parts where, I come in and everything's working. It's just really amazing. So thank you both very much. We at first were in the Modern Language Building, but then we came up here and then in this classroom over here, and now this semester we're back in Modern Language. Finding a time slot for the class, how about that? The time difference. And here we are, with our coffee and ready to go. It's first thing in the morning, and here's these people ready to catch the train to go home after a long day at school. And so we did have to work with that a little bit. I was very aware of it the whole time, though, that we were on opposite sides of the day. And then, of course, numerous trial runs, to see if everything was working properly. As a matter of fact, teaching the course now, Philomena and Todd did a test yesterday morning with the German crew. So in order to get this seminar together, one of the first things we did was to meet a lot and establish what we thought was going to be a good reading list for both sides of the ocean, and also to develop some sort of plan for sharing lectures. And so what we decided to do was get our C-Tools site set up so that students could ask questions, so that he and I could communicate with each other, so that we could exchange documents and actually read through. I could read through his articles, he could read through mine, and we could determine which were the best for our classes. As a matter of fact, I just insert in here that one of the articles that we read was by Deborah Bradley, who's a philosopher in Canada. And she had this article about how if you're a choral director and you're trying to get your students to understand how we're all one big happy family across the globe, that some students might not want to think that, and that your approach to trying to make them think that could be described as fascistic. And so the Germans, reading this article, Andreas read it and said, well, this is fine. And so the students, his students read it, and they were very offended by the idea of fascism with a small f, but still the idea that, they're still, having spent a lot of time in Germany, they're still struggling with the legacy that they've created in the 20th century, and didn't want to deal with it conceptually in an academic course. Recruiting students to take part in the first attempt of an international seminar, sitting down and telling students, okay, there's going to be some interruptions, there's going to be some times when the screen will fall off the wall or something like that, but we're going to have to make it work. And for the first meeting, we dealt with an echo. Remember the echo, Todd? We dealt with an echo, and so Todd got on it, and after a week or so, he figured out what it was, but it was very strange that first day. And the students, there will be times where they're kind of sitting there waiting for things to work out. So, it had to be a group of students who were ready to do this with us. So, both classes met for only a portion of their total class meeting time to discuss their own readings and assignments. I still have my course, and they still have their assignments. It's a 15-week, semester-long course, but the middle 9 weeks of it is the online collaboration part of it. And the same thing for Andreas's course, because we don't both start at the same time. Each meeting was an hour and a half long, and usually there was one reading that we were going to discuss. And so we would begin the course by either Andreas or me doing a kind of a summary of the readings and some discussion points. And typically we would incorporate, we did all this on the Blue Jeans Network. I don't know if any of you are familiar with this video conferencing club, but absolutely mind-boggling. It's amazing. I brought a PowerPoint, and the PowerPoint was shown here, but also there on their screen, which was separate, of course, from their monitor and camera and everything. And then we had a breakout session where one of my students and one of Andreas' students would get together on Skype and talk about the reading. And actually, they did a lot of things besides talking about the reading, as you can imagine, which is good. And then after that, we got back into the group and talked about what they talked about and kind of let them help summarize the article. And on one occasion, we had a video conference session with the author of one of the readings so that the students could offer her feedback and questions. She was beamed in from Canada, and yes, it was the fascistic article. It's strange how that worked out. Okay, so I actually, as part of the, I remember after I did this global video conferencing workshop, I got a grant for $2,500, and the first thing I did was ask Philomena, what am I supposed to spend this on? And she said, well, go to Germany and meet the class. And so I went to Germany and met the class. And I also lectured at 2 other schools there on the global video conferencing, basically what we were doing, what I was doing there in Germany, and trying to enlist potential future collaborators. And while at Bremen, I also met with our class, and this time with me sitting on the German side of the classroom and looking at a video of my students first thing in the morning in Ann Arbor. That was very interesting. And something else that's interesting is seeing people in person that you've only experienced 2-dimensionally before. Like in this global video conferencing workshop, Todd was in the other room. Do you remember this, where you were actually interacting with us, and then you on the screen, and then he walked into the room, and it's kind of, whoa, an extra dimension. I don't know if any of you have ever experienced this before, but if you meet like a movie star or something in person, it's that same feeling of, you have a 2-dimensional experience of them, and all of a sudden it's 3. Well, I ran into one of my students, Andreas' students, in an elevator, and it was very, very strange for that exact same reason. So I spent 3 days with Andreas and his students to understand their daily routines, academic life, and then the cultural life in Bremen. And we did everything. We went to the, those Christmas markets that they have in Germany, and I hung out with the students, and Andreas organized for us to go to all our meals together and everything. And I just sat in their offices and watched them do their work. There were some grad students who were working for him, and we talked about their research and got some really good ideas going about how they might expand some of their ways of thinking about their topic. So we had a capstone project, and the students were supposed to develop these with each other on an approved topic. And then the last meeting, the students did their presentations. I think it's important just to talk a little bit about some of the things that they came up with. In this postmodern world, it's very difficult to hang on to the traditional criteria for determining artistic excellence. I think that's about the most polite way to say it. Is there such a thing as a branch of philosophy called aesthetics, which is the study of the beautiful? I mean, is there something that is universally perceived as beautiful? Probably not, especially not these days. So by what criteria would we determine what is good music? Well, nothing better than to get American and German students together to talk about this. Another really big topic was, and which became a capstone topic for one group, was the concept of Bildung, which is a German educational concept my students had no idea of, in which the learner has the responsibility for being self-cultivating and making a positive contribution to society. However, it's the learner's responsibility. Therefore, the learner could, under certain circumstances, choose to not participate. That means there's students who would basically say, "I prefer not to," and we'll sit there. And it's very, very different from the American approach to education, in which we believe, as teacher educators, that we should be able to teach our students how to motivate the seemingly unmotivatable student. Is that a word, unmotivatable? I don't know. So these are ideas that the German students had to reconcile with the American students and vice versa. One of the things that we used to determine the quality of their work was evaluative criteria derived from the AACU Intercultural Knowledge and Competence Value Rubric, which I got from Philomena. And here's what it looks like. Boy, I hope you can read this. Sometimes it doesn't look very good, but there's supposed to be a URL. Oh, there it is. There's the URL for it if you want to go to it. And I think it's very, very good because it talks about things, kind of thinking processes. It evaluates thinking processes, manipulative skills, and also dispositions in the name of attitudes. And it kind of gives you the different levels of change that you might notice in your students. It's actually wonderful. And I used these. I had this in my syllabus, and I used these to grade the capstone project and their final papers in my class. Course feedback. Both German and American students found that the course readings and activities were challenging and informative. I got some complaints from the German students who thought that the John Dewey chapter that I had them read was too long. It was 40 pages of pretty intense reading. They thought too much. Ongoing logistical aspects were sometimes distracting for the course. And I talked with Vice Provost Holloway about that. You know, sometimes things happen and you have to kind of stop and wait. But I think it's all worth the working of those things out. And Andreas and I reflected on our own performance and impressions and made some revisions. First of all, we changed our reading list. The fascistic article is no longer there. And shorter instructor lectures and more group discussion. We found ourselves getting carried away. We found ourselves having overplanned and not giving the students enough time to do their own thinking. What else is new? Looking forward, we're currently offering the course again this fall semester, and we're having our first online meeting this coming Monday. Just reminding you. And I will again travel to Bremen to lecture and meet with German students near the end of the semester. And now, as it turns out, we are starting to think more carefully about research together, Andreas and I. And one of the things that is a natural topic flowing from the course is what makes a good teacher? What's the role of teaching? You know, more and more we have this idea that we have to have democratic classrooms, that we have to be fundamentally student-based, that we have to move beyond that form of knowledge called transmission, where teachers know, the students don't know. There's conscious telling going on, and then conscious measuring of what has happened in the class, and then a grade for that. We have to move beyond that. So what are the characteristics of good teaching? What are they currently? What might they be? And Andreas and I are going to be looking at, he's going to be talking to some of my students, I'll be collecting data from some of his students, and we're going to be working with someone named Masafumi Ogawa at Yokohama University, if we can find some funding to travel there and to collect data there too. Okay? So that's all. Thank you very much for listening.
Yes, please, yeah.
Screen.
Next up, we have Norma Sarkar and Rosemary Ziemba, who are a teaching team, and they'll be presenting together, I think.
Thank you. Good morning. I have fond memories of this room. In May of 2012, we were together for our first video conferencing workshop. And I was excited because it said no IT skills required. So, and as regarding video conferencing, I had this much. So that's kind of where the seeds were planted, and I'm very happy today to share our story. Make sure I do this right. Yes. Okay, so I need to tell you a little bit about our course. Community Health Nursing is a required course for all bachelor's prepared nursing students. We function with this definition of health and community. Health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. And that is from the World Health Organization. And it's very important, if you're going to do nursing in the community, that you think very holistically. Our objectives for our students are to introduce them to nurse roles in community settings, to focus on population health, rather than the health of individuals, the health of populations and subpopulations, and to get them to think of community as the context for health promotion and care. And these students have spent most of their time in an acute setting, obviously learning nursing skills. So this is a real shift for them in terms of coming out to the community. The course has one lecture section that meets weekly and 8 to 10 clinical sections. The clinical section has a clinical instructor and 8 students, and they focus on clinical practice in a community setting. Nursing and global health go well together. All nurses will encounter a variety of cultures and beliefs wherever they practice, and as James quite carefully illustrated, through immigration, travel, and technology, all parts of the globe have touched each other. We always say that disease is only a plane ride away. There are very common links between global health and community health. We focus on teaching students community assessment skills, and again, we look at population health and vulnerable populations. What populations experience disparity or less access to care? And we use a framework called social determinants of health. And I'm sharing this because it's become very important in our video conferencing work. So these are the social determinants of health: the neighborhood and built environment, economic stability, education, social and community context, and health care. And all of these have an impact on people's health. Our learning goals for global health in our course are to increase the cultural competence of our students, to give them a more global health perspective, looking not just at local and national issues, but global issues, and utilizing community assessment with the social determinants of health. We do have a CRLT Internationalizing the Curriculum grant, which has helped us with those efforts. We see our global health efforts in our course in a three-pronged strategy. We want all students to touch global health through immersion, through video conferencing, or through Glocal. I'll talk a little more about that. Our immersion experiences are an experience in Quito, Ecuador. We take 14 to 16 students, and they work in the Ministry of Health clinics in South Quito. Those efforts have been funded by CGIS, and this year we had a Department of Education grant, and next year we're back with CGIS. This was in 2013. These were our students in Quito, Ecuador. Our next immersion experience is coming up is Delhi, India. Our partner is the Salokia College of Nursing in New Delhi. We were there in August to plan that experience, and the students will be paired with a Salokia College of Nursing student and visit government hospital outpatient departments and regional health clinics. And we have an India Initiative grant that will allow us to take students in 2015 and 2016. This is my colleague to the far, this side, Amber Dalwig, and myself, a faculty, the principal of the school, and Jaya Singh, the chairman of the school. This was part of our welcoming ceremony. It was quite lovely. The other exciting part of our immersions is that we partner on campus. We have an elective course called Perspectives in Global Health, and U of M students may take that elective, and they may opt to take the travel portion of that elective, which takes them with our 456 students on our immersion experiences. So these are students interested in public health, medicine, public policy, and it's been a very nice mix of students that go on our immersion. Okay, video conferencing. Why video conferencing? It has helped us to accomplish the learning goals of global health without the travel. We can't take everyone. It expands global health opportunities to a larger population of our students, and it helps faculty to use available technology. I concur, Blue Jeans is wonderful. And it has enhanced our faculty teaching. So this is the basic plan. We have approximately 8 to 10 two-hour video conferencing sessions. Our students here and our global partners each do a community assessment in their local community, and we use those social determinants of health as a basis for our discussion. So each week we look at a specific social determinant of health, and students, small groups of students on both sides look at that. For instance, look at education in their locality. We exchange the information in advance so that we can facilitate our discussion while doing the video conferencing. And we use something called the Knowledge Gateway from the World Health Organization that has an economic community of practice. And this is kind of like a global C-Tools, but it's very friendly to low bandwidth countries. So it's been very helpful in terms of our use. This is also where Taubman Health Science informationists have helped us to establish research guides, community nursing research guide, global health guide, and they've also posted open source materials onto that ECOP for our global partners. So we've been able to provide them with some materials that they may not have had in the past. Our partners, we started in the fall of 2012 with the Faculty of Nursing Science of the Episcopal University of Haiti in Léogâne, Haiti, which we kindly refer to as FSIL. And these are the 8 students, and it's difficult to see, but on the screen are the 14 students at FSIL that we worked with. We did a community assessment of Ypsilanti, Michigan, and they did a community assessment of Léogâne, Haiti. And what was interesting was to look at the social determinants of health and see that even though the scale of the problem might be large, the determinants were exactly the same. So that was very helpful. We have continued our video conferencing relationship into fall of 2013, and again this fall in 2014. As I mentioned, we were launched by a video conferencing grant from the Office of the Vice Provost for Global and Engaged Learning. We also were able, Dr. Patty Abbott helped us obtain a Quick Wins grant in 2013 so that we could better the connectivity of our partners in Haiti. We were able to leverage some monies to help them get a fiber optic connection. So that was very helpful in terms of improving our connection. Our next partner, my colleague Amber Dalwig, is working with the Slovakia College of Nursing, and they did video conferencing in the winter of 2014 and will again do that in the winter of 2015. Another of my colleagues, Judy Polachecchio, has gotten a video conferencing grant, and in the winter of 2015, she will be working with the University of Botswana College of Nursing. And I wanted to mention that there's a U of M connection to each of our partners. The FSIL school in Haiti was founded by Ruth Barnard, who's a professor emeritus of our School of Nursing. The Slovakia College of Nursing chairman, Jaya Singh, is a MBA graduate of U of M, and the head of the College of Nursing in Botswana is an alumnus of the graduate school in the School of Nursing. So U of M is literally around the globe. So I am going to ask my colleague Rose Zimba to talk about the global portion of our efforts and a little bit more about our class block. Thank you, Rose. Play trick? Right there. Okay.
When we first had our kickoff for Glocal, it was a little interesting because one of our guests thought we were saying go local, as in go crazy. It wasn't our intention, but what we really wanted to do was to create more of the links between what our students could experience here in their practice areas to the broader issues internationally. So the term think globally, act locally was coined actually by René Dubos in 1972. He's advisor to the United Nations Conference on the Human Environment. He was a microbiologist responsible in part for the development of antibiotics, and he foresaw, he was also a very active environmentalist. And so he was focusing on how we can change the global environment, but we can only do that by action at the local level. And in order to do that, we had to constantly be thinking about the local context, the ecology, and the cultures to determine those interventions. And this is key to what we would want our students to be practicing wherever they go, in looking at how that local community perceives the problem, experiences the problem, and what the solutions might be. Okay, I should have put my glasses on. Here we are. We have plenty of diversity locally, and I think it's also important to add that in our nursing school itself, in our nursing classes, despite the fact that nursing interacts with all different cultures, our nursing, the characteristics of the nursing population is fairly homogeneous. So we don't have as much diversity in our practice and our practitioners as would be ideal to match the needs of the country. We also have a lot of immigration, different languages and health beliefs. It's amazing how much of that is going on in our local community. Social and environmental justice, these are some key issues for global health and for our own ethical practice. We look at many issues related to recent immigrants, not necessarily as many as we'd like to in our class, but we can certainly, by looking at the news or evaluating what's going on around us, see a lot of these issues. And the social environmental issue of long-term residents, and I think this is one of the things that I was most concerned about, is that people here were able to see how social and historical issues have created many of the circumstances and problems both locally and abroad. For example, the long shadow of slavery. It can seem very appealing and kind of, I hate to use the term, but sexy to go to another country to look at all these other problems. But we have enough trouble getting people to understand this for our local communities, such as Detroit and other areas in this state. Native Americans also, for another example, and we do have Judy Polachicchio, who's doing the video conferencing, is this semester working with the Native American populations in Michigan. So we also wanted to establish a lot of credibility within our students, not just about cultural competence, but about cultural humility and justice here in the U.S., and also to be looking at what they can learn from all of our local and global partners. Pretty ambitious, but still have to try and move there. This is an example of a local community that was, many people were surprised, including myself and students, to find this. This is a senior low-income high-rise setting in our local area over off of North Campus. You can tell by looking at the audience that these are people of Asian descent. You could recognize some of our students are standing there. I want to point out the large jaws and the large toothbrush that they're holding up in front. This was a presentation on oral health to the community in this setting. And the community themselves had expressed, we did focus group meetings with the assistance of interpreters from the U of M Med School, students from med school, and the U of M Community Programs and Services interpreters, to figure out what the people were most interested in learning about. In this setting, there's about 200 people living there. About 70% of the residents are Chinese American. Primary language would be Mandarin. About 90% of the people who live there are foreign born, not just the Chinese Americans, but there's about 20% are Russian Americans or recent Russian immigrants. And then there's a smattering of some other backgrounds. Census tract around this particular site, and one of our goals with our courses for people to really understand how to use the U.S. Census to identify what the demographic characteristics are, the socioeconomic characteristics of a particular locale, and the languages that are spoken in the home and so on. This is just about one community in my clinical group, but Norma also used the same census information and other networks to find Spanish-speaking Hispanic populations to take students to so that they could practice their Spanish. But you look at the census tract around that area, which was a big surprise again to the students. 57% foreign born, and the largest proportion in that area would be Asian. In the state of Michigan, when you compare, and we're all about comparing and contrasting and doing a community health assessment, so in looking at these different numbers. We find out the same types of things that are issues in many different areas for many people. Access to health care. So for the community at Parkway Meadows, which is the Chinese Americans, many access to health care issues, whether it was because they didn't have insurance, especially recent immigrants in our current, some of our policies and politics, they have nothing. So they're relying on a lot of charity care. Immigration issues, of course, language barriers, and again, I don't speak Chinese, and our students didn't speak Chinese, so we had to figure out ways to communicate. Cultural differences, very fascinating about how many of the residents were using both traditional Chinese medicine and our traditional Western medicine. We were giving a presentation once on cardiac health, and a woman well in her 90s came rushing in complaining. Well, we didn't know what she was saying when she came in, but we translated, found she was complaining of chest pain. And of course, we go into a big panic about what are we going to do now. And we start talking with her through the interpreters to figure out what's happening. And she pulls out from her walker, lift up the little basket, and pulls out 2 bottles of medicine. One is a vial with some Chinese characters on it. And we find out, she says, well, when I get this chest pain, first I take one of these, the Chinese ones. And if that doesn't work, she pulls out her American nitroglycerin tablets. Bottles, and then I take one of these, and if that doesn't work, I go back to this and go back and forth. Well, we have no idea what's in this Chinese medicine bottle. But nonetheless, it turned out that she was not having a heart attack. She was just so anxious about missing our presentation that she started to get some angina. And so did all of we. We were, oh, what do we do now? But it all worked out very well. Course connections. So we look again at this common assignment, everything that students love to loathe, of an assignment to unify the clinical sections both here and abroad, or with all our sections, using a model which relies heavily on the social determinants of health. And we also use the mechanism of a blog to connect our different groups. This is our prior structure for our course. You see our lecture is in the middle. There's be 70 students showing up weekly because we give points for participation. But people showing up to our lectures, and then each one of those students will be in a small clinical section. And we wanted, you can see the knowledge flow tends to go, we give the lecture, the people go off and do their clinical practice in applied settings, and then there may or may not be a connection between the two. In our new model, up at the top, you see where we were video conferencing with Haiti, and we wanted very much for everyone in the class to learn something from this experience. So we created the world-class blog in which students using the community assessment assignment and focus questions with Norma worked very hard with Philomena Meacham in working out our strategies for what students would ask of each other and what they would post on the blog. This is a page from one of our blog sections. In this article, we asked students to bring in current events, news articles from any media source, because we wanted them to realize how global, how much community health, how much health, all these issues are so much a part of reality in a day-to-day basis. And so this was about a hepatitis C epidemic in an area in India, and it goes into linking the student link to other sources such as the WHO database, some other information on immunizations, and fear of testing, and in this case it was the regulation of local pharmacists that were of concern. We had each section, and that's just a partial list of the different sections, would be identified with their own tag. And they would have different topics, and you see different labels off to the side that individual students would report on and tag those posts so we could search them. And then the group post topics were, again, questions and challenges based on the assessment guide. We used the Google spreadsheets and Google Forms to also integrate students doing their own data collection using the census and other sources, and these were drop-down forms. By the way, the blog and this particular feature of the blog, a lot of the things that we did with the blog were ideas from a student, Angela Wan. Then the students would go in and this data would be populating a spreadsheet, and then the students then would go to this spreadsheet and they would compare this data, and their challenge was to summarize that and find what they found was most interesting or surprising and put that on the blog. And you can see at the bottom, we not only have the numbers, but we ask the students their first impressions of the community, what they saw, what they heard. So we found that this really was a great mechanism for comparing and contrasting communities, helped to point out some of the health disparities, looking at global health. Here's a quote from the blog. The most striking comparison between two communities for our group was that 80% of the population of Haiti is below the poverty level, whereas Ypsilanti is listed at 26.4% below the poverty level. Ypsilanti is also the highest percentage of people below the poverty line of all the communities that our class researched. And where we would really hit the sweet spot is if they could all articulate the social and cultural and historical factors that have led to these kinds of disparities and what can be done about it. With that, I'm going to turn that over to Norma. She's going to talk some more on the impact on faculty and students. I did want to add, I learned so much from doing this that was so surprising in terms of not only what other countries, low-resource countries, don't have to work with, but also, and I think another goal, which is to talk about what some of the other higher resources, communities, other countries have as solutions as well, so that we can achieve more cultural humility in that sense.
Thank you, Rose. Okay, we could go on, but the clock is ticking. Okay. So, impact on faculty and students. I think it strengthened the community assessment process amongst the faculty. We really had to communicate with each other better, and it helped us to improve our teaching, and I think it improved the product from our students. It highlighted the importance of vulnerable populations. Students began to understand, well, Chelsea's here and Ipsy's there, and how come they're so different? They started to understand that there were different degrees of need in different communities. There was an increased interest among faculty in global health projects. We now we'll have 3 video conferencing projects, so we're spreading the wealth. Amongst the students, they realized that how resources impact access to data. Not all countries have the census, and it's that easy to access. So they learned about how do you find data when you really need it. And the knowledge of differences in nursing practice based on resource availability. Nursing students in Haiti are taught to do childbirth, and our students were very jealous until they realized that they have 1 doctor per 10,000 people. So it's a matter of need there. And increased awareness of global health issues and cultures. Okay. I'm not going to go through all these, but I'm going to highlight just a couple. These were a couple of U of M students. I thought this was excellent. Most valuable was learning about the students and their personal experiences. This could not be obtained via the internet. Yay for us! There is something to be learned off the computer. And the experience of obtaining a global health perspective without leaving campus. Our FSIL students talked about, I think this exchange between these two communities must continue. It helped me to enrich my vocabulary and also to see what I have in common with other young people and what differentiates us. If the Salokia students talked about most valuable was learning about community in a global context. It was helpful to my global perspective to compare and contrast different communities across the world from each other, realizing there are similarities and interesting differences. And from the Salokia side, as students said, I gained a lot of confidence in speaking English. It was a first experience for me to attend these type of conferences. Next steps. We continue to improve on the blog. We want to continue its utilizations, its incorporation into the course. We would like to do some sharing of our lectures with our global partners. It has increased our interprofessional links. It has linked us across the campus. Todd and Philomena have been wonderful about making us aware. Sometimes we're over there on the hill and we don't always know. And Leslie Davis in our Office of Global Outreach has helped us to link with many. And we're also working hard on second language development for nursing students. Old school was nursing school is too busy, we can't possibly accommodate language. And new thought is language is really important to healthcare practitioners. So it's a wonderful paradigm shift. This was from an FSIL student after our first year. All that I have to say is good work. The initiative you and our dean have taken was not easy, but it was fruitful. Therefore, don't step back in front of obstacles and difficulties. Put that on my bulletin board. All right. There are many to acknowledge, and I don't want to take too much time, but certainly FSIL School and Dean Hilda Elsindor, our new partners in Slovakia, our partners in Botswana. We have local community partners through the U of M Health System Department of Community Programs and Services. The Taubman Health Service Global Health Librarians have brought us so much information and assistance. We've had a lot of interprofessional learning. We've worked with students from pharmacy and dental and medical and public health. We've learned more about all of the student associations on campus. And as James mentioned, all the great international students that are here. We haven't done as much connecting as we want to, but we will. And how to work with our language resources that are available. I've mentioned most of the people on this list. Philomena Todd, James Holloway, Gurpreet Rana, and Kate Saylor, our informationists from Taubman. Dr. Bonnie Haggerty has supported all of our global efforts. Leslie Davis in our Office of Global Outreach, Dr. Patty Abbott. Our 456 faculty who used to tremble when Rose and I would go in and go, we've got another idea. They have been wonderful. And then we had some great research assistants and our IT staff at the School of Nursing, Tina Chang and Kenneth and Nelson. Okay. All right. Thank you so much for your time.
And next we have Luis Sphere Yunus.
Buenos días, ¿cómo están ustedes? Bien? Sí. Aren't you tired? Yeah, you have heard lots of stuff. I'm sorry that I'm the last one to speak on the panel because I know you're tired and I'm Hispanic and we love to talk for a long time. And Filomena says, no, Luis, you only have 10 minutes. So please give me a signal if I'm overdoing it. I'm also surprised that I've become somehow an expert in video conferencing simply because I've been doing it for over 2.5 years. And I want to tell you a little bit about the story of how this began and also what we have been doing. And the most important thing is I would like to raise some questions that you should have in mind, I think, or you could have in mind if you're planning to teach a video conferencing course. The story began about 3 years ago when Professor Evans Young, Assistant Dean, called me and he said, Louis, do you have a minute? You always have a minute for Evan Youngs. And I said, yes, I do. And he says, there is a professor from Colombia who is visiting. Could you talk with him? And he came with his wife. His name is Carlos Yáñez Canal. He's a professor at the university in Colombia called Universidad Nacional. It's the largest sort of national universities among the fifth, probably best university in South America. And it's a university that has an enormous impact in the social life of Colombia. Carlos and I had a chemistry right away. We became not only partners in this process, but we have become very good friends. And we're working together as colleagues in this process. There are a lot of differences between Carlos and I. I'm a lecturer at the university. Carlos is an associate professor. Carlos is mostly a researcher. I'm mostly a teacher. We're both Hispanic. I was born in Chile. My wife is from Colombia, and so I've been in Colombia lots of time, and it was very familiar to be there. And I really love Colombia. I like the soccer team. I like, the music, salsa, and I like the food. I also want to tell you that Carlos and I began to have conversations not only about what we wanted to do. Actually, that was the last thing we did. Most of the time is what we were as people. What we wanted to accomplish as human beings and also as faculty at the university. We didn't do it the other way around. And I felt that if you're going to work with somebody, it could be interesting to ask questions like, what is there in this for me? Why do I do it? What do I want to get out of it? In which way my career, my life, my knowledge, my quality of being could be improved by engaging in a video conferencing course. And also not to look at the other faculty as a means or an instrument, to my video conferencing experience to benefit my students or to benefit myself, but in which way can I be of service to that person? In which way that person associating with me, with this university, with my students, in some way is good for them, and it will do good things for them as a person. So we decided to create a research and pedagogy group with our students that we will call it Bodies and Identities, because we both had interest on the issues of the sociology and the anthropology and the philosophy of the body, of sexuality, of pleasure, of suffering, and of how people conform their identities as a human being. So it's a very broad topic, but it's also a little bit transgressive. It has to do with fields in sociology that are not at the core of the discipline sometimes. They have created a Facebook website with this process. We have created also, and still not fully published, a website here at the university on that. But we began to do it outside the traditional context of the university meeting. We didn't have a course. I couldn't get my department to be convinced that, you know, talking with students in another country was going to be something fascinating for the sociology department. So Carlos and I decided to just do it. And we got an enormous support from Filomena, from Todd, and from the university in terms of resources. And that's what we have been doing for 2 years and a half, non-stop. Every single Friday for 2 hours we have been meeting and chatting, sometimes through the spring term, you know, doing it. We have visited each other along the way. And we have had students who just want to learn and who want to discuss things with the students from other places. And most of, you know, of what we want out of them is that they pursue some line of interest and they begin to read about it and write about it and get published and get to know the rest of the world. So the focus is really on the students. I tell you that because most of the video conferencing experience is on people teaching courses. And courses are formal, they have a structure, you have assignments, you have, you know, specific things to do. We have been in a freer environment where, you know, what we do is not a course. The students often don't get credit for that unless they do it as independent reading with me, and I don't get paid for that. So there is a lot of flexibility on what could happen, you know, in the conversations we have. We have always a theme to talk about. We have always something planned ahead, but it could take us anywhere, and this is very much part of the cultural tradition of conversation in South America. The conversación is something that begins with some common idea, but it could go anywhere. It doesn't have to be logical. It doesn't have to be an ending. It doesn't have to integrate at the end. It sort of just happened. And Carlos and I are very good conversationalists as people and also as teachers. So we have been doing this, and so that my students change every term. I have sometimes 15 students, sometimes 4 students, and students stay over time. So I may have the same students term after term. Often they leave because they have to graduate or they just cannot take the Friday off to do these kind of things. And so I have students who have a lot of seniority, and also I have students who this is the first time they do something like that. So for instance, this year I will have about 4 students who have never had any conversation with people abroad in this sense, have never done video conferencing, and they are really freshmen. They are not even students who have experience here at the university. Also, I have to tell you that we have students who are minority group and students who are mainstream, and also on the other side. Carlos has students who are, on the average, a little bit older than the students that I have here, and I have to take that into consideration. And some of them have children, some of them are paid staff, you know, to work with him. We have involved them into conferences. Carlos is very good at finding out international conference in South America. For instance, we're going to be organizing a conference with a Latin American organization rooted in Argentina about the body in October 2015, and so we're going to get our students to present papers in that conference. So everyone will write a paper for a conference. Some of them, you know, will be accepted as people presenting, and some of them will get published. And the success that I wanted to share with you, and I'm very proud of that, not me, but the student, is that in the last year we have sent about 5 to 6 students to conferences abroad. Our students have actually not gone there. The students from his side have actually done it because they have different ways of securing money for the students. I did want to let you know that I was surprised that our graduate students have a lot of money available for them to travel when they have to present to a conference, but our undergraduate students don't. So we need to do something about that. It's very important. It was very hard for somebody who had a paper accepted at the conference in Mexico, and she couldn't go because she didn't have money to go, or I didn't know how to find it. You know, it could be both ways. But we had students, 4 of our students having their papers accepted at the conference, they didn't go, and 1 of our students got published, and that student took her paper and showed it, you know, to the Women's Studies department, and she won the only undergraduate award for the best undergraduate paper on women issues in the Women's Studies department. And she was so proud in commencement to get the award. She's not a Women's Studies student, she's a student from biology who wrote about the participation of women in the guerrilla warfare, in the violence in Colombia. And she came out with $500, and she was very proud because if there is another conference, at least she has $500 to go. Carlos and I have also been able to publish, you know, papers, you know, in these conferences, and in the next conferences, Carlos and I will be the people deciding whose papers are going to be accepted. So there will be a little bias there in the way that we decide. So the questions that I wanted to share with you, and I hope that they are useful to you. I apologize that if this is not valuable, but you know, think about what do you really mean by global teaching? You know, to have a conversation about that before you do it, or at least at the beginning, is very important because along the way it's very hard to change things. For instance, what is your view of globalization, and what is the role of the University of Michigan in that process? Is globalization for you and I a process of Americanizing the rest of the world? Is it a process of everyone saying the University of Michigan is the most fabulous university in the world? Is it showing them that we have a technology that they will envy because we have laptop computers, blue jeans, you know, jackets, you know, all kinds of things that, you know, they don't have over there? So think about that. Is it something where we want our students to benefit? Or is it a process in which we want not only our students, but their students to benefit too? Is it a process in which we want a world that is going to be a shared world, meaning that we will contribute with our American culture, our American technology, and our American wisdom to the world, but that we also are open to learn and to incorporate in our own life what we can learn from another society? And you and I know, you know, that it's very hard sometimes for our institutions or our society to think that we can actually learn something from La Universidad Nacional, that we can learn from South America, that we can learn from Africa, that actually their practices, their technology, their ways of seeing reality could contribute significantly to the betterment of our own lives. Often we don't do that, and we may miss that kind of opportunity in the process. The other thing that I always ask a question is, it's more personal. Why on earth anyone would like to teach a course that is on video conference with somebody on the other side of the world, when all the efforts in pedagogy today are to do things that are interactive, eye to eye, really close to each other? Why would you want to do something with China, with India, with Colombia that is so distant? And so you can imagine what that implies, that, you know, we're going to have to create an environment, as you said it before, local, an environment that is democratic, that is interactive, that is multicultural, that is intercultural, you know, with people that are on the other side of the screen, where everyone is looking in another direction, where people are very distant from each other. People are of different ages, different social classes, different languages, different cultures. How to do that? It's a very difficult thing. And so I want you to begin to think about these kind of questions. At the more practical level, it's a question of timing. You know, for instance, in Colombia, we can have a class during the day because we only have an hour or two difference. But we have to really coordinate the time changes. It has happened lots of times that Carlos said, we waited for you. You know, nobody showed up. And it's like we forgot that they changed time in Colombia. Filomena does a very good job of reminding me of that, you know. Or sometimes we wait for them and they say, no, we had a class and you know, and you were not there because we just were late. So timing is very important. I'm making an arrangement with a professor in a university in China, the university that we have connection. And it's very hard because, you know, if I teach here at 6, it's, you know, it's like 6 in the morning there. It's just very hard to find sometimes where it could coordinate. And so we're trying to figure out some dates where we can do that. And he, you know, so I'm going to have an evening session. We're going to meet about 7 or 8 in the evenings, and he's going to have to be up very early and get some students at, you know, 6, 7, 8 in the morning. So time is very important, and there is a global thing there. Should the people in Colombia follow my time and make the adjustments, or should we adjust to their time? And so we have decided to adjust to their time. We are the ones who have to be aware of the time changes. When it comes to teachers, there are all kinds of questions, not only about coordinating, but remember what Carlos asks of his students, what he expects of his students, the students' assignments are different than my own. We don't have a common syllabus. We actually don't have a syllabus most of the time because we don't have a class. And he also has a different way of relating to students that is culturally appropriate there, but here it may be very foreign. And so students sit next to him, they hold him, you know, he talks to people directly, you know, they do things that are considered to be too Hispanic here, you know. They come into the classroom and they kiss each other 2 or 3 times on their cheeks. And he knows everyone's names in my class. He will go and say, "Oh, John, how are you today? You know, you told us that." I'm not as good as doing those kinds of things. So it's very important to realize that teachers have different ways of teaching, and therefore you are teaching some class of some group that has input from both sides. And what Carlos and I have tacitly agreed is that whatever he expects of his students and does with students and what they read is independent of what my students do, but we work together. So there is complete respect of the style of pedagogy and what is expected of students in both sides. When it comes to students, I think it's very interesting that when you're thinking of pedagogies that are interactive and all that, we want to know who the students are, to have small groups, to have dialogues with each other, all the techniques that we know about improving our classroom. But remember, all the relationships among students are going to be dramatically changed, not only among each other, but also with the students in Colombia because of that video conferencing. If you have a student, for instance, who is very quiet in your class and she's a student from Hispanic descent, once the video conference starts, she is a protagonist. So here maybe they will exclude her, maybe here she's very quiet, but then when the screen comes, you know, and you have to talk with people in Colombia, she is the person who knows the most about it, she's very excited, she feels validated. So that the interactions among students, you have to watch them really well because they change with the presence of students from another place and also with the presence of another faculty. Because when my faculty says, "Hey, Johnny, how are you?" that Johnny in my class becomes very important because Carlos recognizes him. Sometimes Carlos would say, "How come Maria didn't come today? You know, what happened with Rachel?" And so whatever he does or I do has an impact on the way that the students interact with each other. I tell you that because I'm very conscious about multicultural teaching to make sure that students feel equally empowered, that they have equal access to resources, and they feel equally attended by the teacher in a class. And I have noticed that now by having another teacher, another set of students, those interactions change. And I have to pay attention to them and make sure that people continue having a multicultural environment. When it comes to assignment, I thought that, you know, even though most of what we do is not in a class, I ask my students to read. They read a lot during the week. They write usually a 7 to 10 page paper at the end of the term, and they collect bibliography. What I find is to do assignments that in some way not only allow the students to learn and to know a subject matter and to write a paper on a topic that they like, but to have the assignments so that they will improve the intercultural, the multicultural, and the global experience. So thinking of the assignments is very important as a way to be able to test whether the students actually, you know, lived or that you created a multicultural environment. So having small groups that are mixed, internationally mixed, having access to computers where people after the time that we're together could, you know, communicate with students over there, having the students write papers together, trying to do things in the assignments that incorporate the other side and that create a global experience. In the case of Marina Hackett, the student who got the award and got published in an international journal, She wrote a paper about Colombia. She was always interested in the role of women in society, particularly the role of women in violent times. She comes from an area of the world where the partition of India and Pakistan created a lot of havoc in her own family as well as in the society. But she would have never been able to write a paper about the role of women in the Colombian FARC or the guerrilla warfare if she wasn't in coordination, communicating, talking, and reading, and having conversations with women from Colombia. Another thing that I talk that, sometimes people say don't talk about these kind of things is take care of yourself in the process as a person. It's a global thing. You're with millions of human beings watching on the internet, people helping you with technology, but it is a pretty lonely endeavor. You think about it a lot. I think about my work and what I do in the video conferencing group, even though it's not my class. I don't have a class. Sometimes I think more than what I think for a regular class. And I read more and I spend more time with my students, office hours, meeting with them, taking care of them. But you are a little bit alone in the process. And so it's very important to nourish yourself by traveling abroad, by getting to know your colleagues, by having people around you that understand what you're doing and can support it. And I think that the university could create institutional arrangements to make sure that this process is not like a Lone Ranger process, but it's a process that is considered to be at the core of what the university wants and would like to do in the future. The last thing I wanted to tell you had to do with pedagogy. I'm really interested in pedagogical issues. Before the content itself, it may be very cultural, but I wanted always to have a class that was student-centered, and I've been doing that for 23 years. And it's hard because, as Carlos Javier says, you have to transfer, the power, the control to the students. Have to be a student-centered. We have to get away from the lecturing, from I know, you don't know, from you do what I do. You have to sort of listen to find out what the students want. Where do they want to go with this? How the conversation affected them intellectually, but also emotionally. I wanted to be dialogic conversation, that American students learn how to be in dialogue with other people on equal terms, not on a touristic sense, exotic sense, or looking down at people because they are of color, because they don't have an iPad, because they don't dress well, because they come late to class. How to create an environment where they will respect the other student, it's a very important thing. I also wanted to be very multicultural. And this is an issue that is important for me as a faculty. Being a faculty of color raises a lot of issues in any class. Today, a student left a banana, for instance, in my table on the lecture hall teaching Introduction to Sociology. Did you remember what happened in the World Soccer Cup? That Brazil was playing, and there has a lot of Afro-Brazilians, and somebody threw a banana from the where the people are sitting. And the player stopped the game. The referee, didn't do anything, and he peeled the banana and ate it. But it was a serious racist incident in the World Cup. The person was identified. He went to jail. And there was a lot of comments about what you should have done if they put a banana. Should you have thrown it back to the person? Should you have stepped over it? Should you have ignored it, or should you have eaten it? And so today I was eating a banana in my sociology 100 class. And I was really good because I didn't have breakfast, so that really helped. But most of it, we wanted to be non-colonial. In fact, what characterizes my pedagogy, I think, without being arrogant, is sort of non-colonial, transformative, and compassionate. Meaning how to create an environment so that the people in Colombia will not feel that they're less than us, that they're at the lower level. And so we have done lots of things. For instance, the class is in Spanish, because it will be so much easier for us to do it in English, because we will talk, we will say whatever we want, and then they will have to figure out how to translate it and how to deal with the anxiety of not understanding what is going on. So this is not a Spanish class. I'm not trying to teach people Spanish, but because the Colombians speak Spanish, then the class is in Spanish. That means that I do an additional extra work, which I sort of quickly try to interpret, in real time what is going on. Sometimes we have a student doing it. But it's very important for our students to be in a context in which English is not the language that is spoken, and to realize that there are things in Spanish that cannot be fully translated, that there are very rich experiences in Spanish culture that cannot have a language, a word, the equivalent in English, and they have to deal with that kind of thing. We also want not to use so much technology that is oppressive to them, that is kind of disturbing. And so we try to play it very low-key when it comes to the use of technology. First of all, because, like Norma, I'm not an IT person, but also because I don't want to offend the audience, even though their university has more than enough technology to do this job really well. In the technology thing, there are issues that you have to think about. For instance, the lighting, the light that you use. Most people in the classes in Colombia are people of color. And so if the light is not really, well taken, they will look very dark, even people who are light-skinned. And that has an impact in the way that our students relate to somebody who is a faculty student who is dark. So we have to take care of the voices, for instance, the sound. If people are speaking in Spanish, the sound has to be pretty good. Otherwise, it's much harder to understand. We have to use timeouts, meaning at some moment in the class we go like that, meaning we talk to each other and they talk to each other because they had to debrief what is going on. I want the class to be transformative, meaning that I would like the students not only to know, to have data, understandings of theories and concepts, but especially to transform themselves, to become agents of social change, but especially to become agents of inner change, to be different kinds of individuals. And when you become a different kind of a person, by using other dimensions of being that sometimes in our university we don't emphasize so much, which in Latin America we call el corazón, your heart, empathy, compassion, caring, that you not only will be a better person, and you will be able to communicate with people on the other side of the world better than through our sort of Western rationality, but also you will be able to know things. You will have access to knowledge, to wisdom, to information that you could never access it with your rational mind. That is, if you don't have empathy, you will never understand what it feels to be a victim of something. You may know all the data about poverty. You may know all the theories, conflict, functional theories of poverty, Karl Marx, Dahrendorf, all of them, but you will never understand how it feels to be poor. What is the suffering that the poor person goes? The humiliation, the exclusion, the feeling of being despised by other human beings, not being able to take care of my children, not being able to educate them. You can know everything about feminist writing and all that, but if you don't have your heart open, you will never know what a woman goes through when she's the target of violent and sexual assault. And so there is a knowledge, a personal experience that the students in Colombia will never share with us. We will never have access to it if we don't transform our classroom into an environment that also works on transforming the student, on enriching, nourishing dimensions of their self, that if they don't do, they will never be able to communicate, to connect. They will never really have a truly intercultural experience. And of course, they will never have access to different ways of knowing, different ways of understanding the world, different ways of feeling and perceiving your body, your sexuality, your sense of being, and your conception of what your society is all about. And that's what we try to do. And in the process, I think our students have grown a lot. One of the things that happened with the students who have been doing this for 2 or 3 times is that they want to travel and get to know the people on the other side. They want to write more. They are more interested in research sometimes than in anything else. And also Carlos and I have changed. Carlos and I have become very good friends. I could count him as one of my best friends now. I go to Colombia. He says, no, don't go to a hotel. I sleep in his kids' rooms. I am planning to write a book with him now on the sociology of compassion, how compassion has changed throughout history. So that we have grown intellectually as human beings, but we have grown as persons in the process. And Carlos always tells me how grateful he is that we have done that, because the whole field of the body and sexuality has not been the core of his writing, in the last 20 years. So he says, Luis has always introduced me to that. I think he has helped me to renew my interest in teaching, has given me more commitment to excellence here at the university. And I want to be a soldier, not a general or a captain in this war at trying to eliminate ignorance, colonialist thinking, exclusive thinking that does not allow us to create a world that will be better for everyone, including ourselves. Thank you.
I'm going to ask our panelists to come back to the panel table so that they can answer questions for the next about 15 minutes. And I'll walk around with the microphone, so if anyone has a question, make eye contact and raise your hand. Here we go.
Hi, I'm Ovita Fuller, professor in microbiology. I have two questions. One, how do you navigate the tuition differences at the universities, or do your students pay tuition here and their students pay tuition there? And then the second question for the last presenter, as I understand it, your students are not enrolled in a course. So are they doing this because they want to, and they then take the benefit to apply to other courses? So two questions, the first for the first two panelists, and then the last for the last gentleman. Thank you.
About the tuition? I think it's okay. We have our own course. It's a requirement for graduate degrees in music education, either the master's or the PhD. And our students pay tuition here, as usual. And Andreas has his own semester that starts not at the exact same time, but he has students who are also enrolled at the University of Bremen and pay tuition. However, tuition at the University of Bremen is about $240 per academic year. So there is a huge difference, even though there's a similar policy, which is that we each pay our own tuition and interact together.
We have the same arrangement. The students here are enrolled in their course and pay tuition here, and then our video conferencing partners, they're enrolled in their school and pay their tuition there. So each institution grants its own credit, and then we just work together. Oh.
Cost of living's a lot more.
Yeah.
I think it works. Does it work?
Yes.
Yeah. I think ultimately the students do it because they really care, but students come from many walkways. Some students want to do independent reading with me. And I have found that I give the most independent reading in my department, but it's very lonely for the students to do independent reading alone with me. To study alone, to talk with me only. So I tell them, why don't you come to this Friday meeting? So some students do get independent reading, and they do research. I have, for instance, students from Europe who wants to do work with me, and so they get credit in Europe. But I think about half of the students don't get credit from me from anywhere. They just want to do it. And they want to be with other students. The more that they spend time together, the more it's their thing rather than my thing. They want to talk about what they read last week in front of 5-6 people who will make comments, who are very professional. You cannot imagine how professional our undergraduates are when it comes to doing this kind of thing. They give links, bibliography, they make comments on stuff. And so I have, for instance, at this very moment, people working on issues of like the gaze, the dominant gazes, male gaze, white gaze, able gaze. I have people doing work on compassion fatigue, the politics of compassion. And then I have people doing work on discrimination in Colombia and in indigenous populations here. They're very distinct things, but when they talk, they begin to see how all these things intersect very much, and they help each other. And they all end up doing that kind of work. So we need to create, maybe at the university, some kind of course number or some kind of space. Maybe it exists, and I don't know, where I would get paid and my students will get credit for doing that. That is not the traditional course where I have to have a syllabus, assignments, tests, and stuff like that, because it's not going to happen, at least in the way that I do things. The other thing that I do want to tell you is that there is an advantage of not doing a course in some senses. I've done this as a course only one time, and the students were not part of my research group. So I will have the course in one room, and then 2 hours later I will meet with my research group. And the students, when it's a class, they're very interested in what do I need to do to get an A. All the stuff of the video conference, they see it as instrumental to their grade and to their class, which was a new thing to me because I've already been doing like almost 2 years of the other one where those kinds of issues are not raised at all.
Hi, this is directed generally to everyone because you all touched on it at different levels, but the School of Nursing folks made a very clear point of it that not only did you have to think about how to use the video conferencing, but you actually restructured how the class worked because of that. And I guess I'm just looking for a comment. I mean, we went from a series of island sections to this community and just changed the way the whole class worked. Just some reflections or comments on how valuable that was, and would you have done something like that if you hadn't been sort of taken down that road because of what you're doing with this global engagement?
So as the faculty of record, I had the lecture section, and I would also have a clinical section sometimes. And even when we were doing the immersion, before we did the blog and the video conferencing, it always felt like there was one group that was getting special consideration because they were doing something different. And yet what they were doing that was different wasn't being brought into the larger group. And also, all of the different things that the students were doing were not getting the same kind of recognition. So when Norma got the video conferencing grant, and it was going to be just with her section and the others, I don't remember who said it, but I could never wrap my head around doing a lecture here that was going to be translatable or applicable, and I just couldn't get my head around that as the lecturer. But at any rate, it just said, yes, video conferencing is great, but we have to figure out a way to include the whole class. So that was the intention. We've had to be increasingly intentional. And now for the new faculty that's doing the course, figuring out how to be very intentional to make those connections transparent, visible, and that every group gets credit for what they're doing as something special. And linking that as well to the global concepts. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it made changes for the better. We kind of were independently doing our thing, and now, students are comparing, whether it's global or whether it's locally, they're getting the benefit of the assessment of each group. So they're looking at places all over southeastern Michigan and globally. And so it really has, I think it's improved the course. I think it's made us better faculty. So, what Rose said, that's fine to do, but we gotta, somehow we have to share this. So that's how it came about.
Hi, I'm Sherry Kasuji from the School of Social Work, and as I'm thinking of trying to do this with Chinese students, two of the points that you all made really struck out for me. One was time differences. And I'd like to hear a little more about negotiating time differences, not just, I know beginning of the day, end of the day is hard, but also if you need tech support and you've got to do it at 7 o'clock in the morning on one end and 7 o'clock at night on the other, sort of, how did you sort of negotiate the whole package of time differences? And secondly, would you advise people to at least attempt, if it's possible, I know this is a financial issue, to begin with a very small group of students as you're trying to work out the crazy interactions across places? So the general questions anyone could answer.
We worked with Philomena and Todd on the time issues. India, we go early in the morning, and our partner is a residential nursing school, so they've adjusted their evening schedule so that we can be included. So that wasn't as big of an issue for us as it could have been in terms of time. And it is good not to start out with too huge of a group. I mean, we have 8 students in our section on this side, but our partners usually have anywhere from 12 to 16. And I know video conferencing is done with very large groups, but I would concur with starting small and building your way up. There's a lot of planning that needs to go on in terms of working with your partners. You know, what's the semester going to be structured like? And then there's all the things that don't quite go as planned. So you have plan A, plan B, and sometimes plan C. You know, so there is a lot of planning, and so I think it's better, you know, to start with a manageable number.
When I had my course, the only time that I've done it with the course, we had, you know, a fixed amount of time, but the course was an hour and a half, and so we'll dedicate a portion of the course to the video conferencing, and the other portion will be for us to debrief and talk about. In my, what I call my research group, I block like 3 hours on Friday, of which maybe an hour and a half will be video conferencing. The other part will be what I do with my students and what the students do with each other, or individual conferences. So the students know that there will be 2 or 3 hours on Friday that they will dedicate to this, but it could be only a portion of that we do video conferencing. So that's how I manage that the time in Colombia, which is an hour difference, will not affect, you know, very much the attendance of students in the class. But it is a big issue. Time is a socially constructed thing too. It has meaning, and that meaning could affect the nature of your class and the learning.
I wanted to add something. I wanted to add to the issues around the time that for our blog and for other things, even though time is not so much of the issue, I think you also have to consider certain political or cultural or even ethical moral beliefs about what should be shared in access. So if you're talking about China, we could not do the blog in China because we're using a Google product, and therefore we run into some problems there. With our students in India, there were issues about what the faculty wanted those students to, how much access they could have. There was not just the digital divide in terms of their understanding of the technology, the use of it, but there was also some moral, ethical concerns about what they wanted their students to be viewing or engaging on. So I think the time is an important element, but it's also, as Luis had mentioned, the different styles of teaching, meaning you would not, our students treat faculty sometimes much differently than would be allowed in some other countries. And also these other issues that go around the technology itself and the use of the internet. I probably answered more than a question.
I wanted to add something more. There is other elements of time that we haven't talked, which is when you start your class. For instance, in Colombia, the terms begin in August, and they finish, you know, by the end of November. And then they start in February and they finish. You see what I mean? So that every term for me is different. In the fall term, our students are too fresh for the video conference in comparison to Carlos students who have been together already more than a month and a half. So that has an impact on the class, and then in the winter term is the other way around. And so sometimes that, and the other thing that makes a difference are holidays and political stuff. Last term we have a major strike in Colombia led by students, and the question was, are we going to be strike breakers or not? And so we did have a meeting, and we decided that we're not going to strike, and break the strike. And so we didn't have video conferencing until almost the end of the term when they were able to come back. But when the students came back, they came back exhausted, demonstrating, doing hunger strikes, writing posters. You know, for them it was not a vacation, and therefore all that we talked about was how that has impacted their own lives. So that was and you have to understand, in South America we have a lot more vacations than we have here in the United States. And so we don't have the same amount of classes together as we have here. So that's another issue. When do you want to begin the term and end?
And relates to Luis's philosophy of teaching and what he wants. And I would like to hear about your project and how this, that I love this title, non-colonial, compassionate, transformative pedagogy, or pedagogy. What elements of it can you see? You have already said something in this previous question, but I love to hear more about that.
I think one of the things is we're always conscious that we have to be making a contribution to our partners. And so one of the ways we did that was working with the informationists and finding a way to provide them with more open source materials. So giving them access to more educational materials, not necessarily just community health nursing, but to their nursing, their whole nursing education. Let's see. Transformative, I think the reflection with the students is very important. And we too video conference, and then we have some time afterward. And having them talk about, you know, what is this experience like? We do educational, but also the important part is they get some get to know each other time. What do you do for fun? What kind of clinicals do you take? You know, which rotations did you like the best? You know, that's just as important to the students as, you know, the social determinants of education. So we try to allow time for them to share with each other in that respect. And compassion, I really, what you said about, you know, what our way is not necessarily the best way, and really the learning, you know, well, maybe you don't have as many resources, but how do you manage, you know, what do you have, and what, you know, how do you deal with the issues that you have? So I think we've tried to be very conscious of, you know, making sure that it's not, oh, here we are, we're coming your way, but, you know, and acknowledging what our partners have brought to us is really important as well.
Telling people what to do is a very nurse thing. And our students also feel put on the spot that they have to have the right answer. They need to know what to do to fix the problem. So it's really, and we also as educators was very jealous of the idea that we didn't have to worry about the grades or what we were teaching and the objectives and what was tested and so that we could allow the students to have more of a conversation and to find their own path and to tell us what they know and what they've experienced, because very often we have no idea and they have a very rich background. But getting the students to listen before they advise people what they should do. I mean, this is a hard thing to do, but it's also something that is very valuable when we take anybody to any community, is to get that community's perspective. So all of those different things, and I see the time, and speaking of time, but certainly many challenges, and would really like to flip that dynamic as well in terms of listening as opposed to telling.
So
shut up now.
We're hoping to have lots of these types of conversations over lunch too, but in our last about 5 minutes or so, I want to give time to Moni Dressler, who's the Director of Instructional Support Services, to share some information about resources. And actually I heard embedded in some of the questions kind of concerns about how do I get tech support at 7 a.m. So I think Moni is going to share with us a lot about instructional resources.
Well, hi everybody. Before I say anything, I just want to thank Philomena, Todd, and Laura for all they've done. So thank you so much. This is a great event. As Laura said, I'm Moni Dressler, and Philomena had asked me to talk on a variety of things, and I had she had said, about 15 minutes in the questions. We're going to just not even do any of that. I'm just going to give you the very condensed version. Laura's handing a sheet of resources out. When anybody's thinking about any type of project like this, you really want to think about the four main aspects of that course. Because anyone can do this. As Norma said, you don't have to be an IT expert. You don't have to have a lot of experience, because we have lots of resources and people here who can help make that magic happen. and really considering a lot of the issues that Carlos, Norma, Rose, and Luis have talked about that are administrative in nature. How do you deal with the bureaucracy? What sort of agreements do you have to have? Whom do you need to involve? And being able to think about those timing issues, the location issues. How do you schedule a course if you need to do setup? How do you interact with the registrar's office? And make those sorts of things happen. And really the place to start with a lot of those administrative details are with one of our groups or with a faculty member who's already been doing the work. And on our support unit side of the yellow sheet that you just received, the Instructional Support Services and the Language Resource Center have helped navigate a lot of the administrative details, but we can also help connect you to the folks who are around. Also, the resources that are on the webpage for the Council on Global Engagement in Global Michigan are really extraordinary. If you've not been there, you absolutely need to take a look. Helps you walk through a lot of the really tricky issues. The thinking about, the faculty talked a lot about the pedagogical issues, and there are lots to really think about, particularly as James mentioned in his remarks, that how do we create those opportunities to really have the pervasive incorporation of the global international aspects into our courses, and really starting there, and then talking about how you're going to make the course happen, course management issues, activities that go on in the classroom, how do you engage the students, and really Center for Research and Learning and Teaching, and the library, and Instructional Support Services and LSNA and Language Resource Center are key places to go to start talking about those issues. And we can connect you with faculty who have taught similar courses or have made similar adjustments in their classes. Similarly, of sharing the resources that your students will need to do their work. So if they're doing collaboration and collaborative work, where are those spaces that they have access to the resources that they need, or how do you set up tools? The library has really extraordinary resources there as well. There's a link on the yellow page to one of their reference guides on international resources and connections, and helping students make those connections as well. There's also something important that the library can do to help bring those resources to the students with the partner school, because we don't want those resources just available to us, but also what open source resources are there, what sort of training do they need to do, and the folks at the library who will be in the showcase this afternoon will talk some about how they can do a workshop over Skype, over BlueJeans, with the partner students to help them connect to the resources they need, or how to do some of the work. So we can make those resources available to our students and share that. Then thinking about the technical issues, Todd will lead the discussion this afternoon, but really something that I want to stress is start with your local IT staff, your local support, but we also, through this project, the Language Resource Center and Instructional Support Services are really trying to change how we're working together on campus, because so often we're really limited to what's going on within our own school, and thinking about cross-unit teams and how we can support each other, how we can share information, how we can learn from each other. So, we're really trying to have this experience be a way of changing the way that we work and the way that we collaborate. So in that sense, I want to send out an open invitation to not hesitate to contact me, contact anybody from LSNA, because we can share what we've learned and help spread that, because that's the way that we can scale these sorts of initiatives, is through that collaboration and information sharing. And then thinking about funding, because funding is really important. And I love what nursing has done. You guys, I think, have used every single source of funding available. It's spectacular. On the back of the yellow sheet are lots of different funding sources and ways to connect to that. And then ask Norma and Rose how they've managed this, because it really is really spectacular. And then sort of just closing, I wanted to share 3 secrets that I always think about in how to make something like this successful. The one is really, and you've heard these themes already, I think, through the faculty presentations, is one, be flexible, right? If you go into this sort of experience with enthusiasm, a spirit of experimentation and exploration, you're willing to try just about anything, you will have a great time. Your students will enjoy it. You'll be able to get through the problems without having it be a disaster. So it really is that attitude that you're approaching things. Second, invest the time in the relationships. First is who is that partner? Building the relationship with your partners and your partner colleagues. I think we heard some fabulous stories of making the time to connect so that the 2 faculty are understanding each other and are making a successful experience. But then also investing time in your class, perhaps even giving up some of that critical content to be able to have time in each class session, in each homework assignment, for the students to connect to students on the other side, because it's through those personal relationships that students then start to really integrate the content that they've been learning to the actual interpersonal experience. And that is often difficult because you really do have to release some of the time that you might normally have scheduled very tightly in your lesson plans. And then third is really thinking about sharing your knowledge. Talk to your colleagues about the experience that you're having. Talk to colleagues who are abroad, and then ask lots of questions. And if you're not sure about something, ask as well. So, you have lots of contacts on your yellow sheet. Please don't hesitate. We'll be around in the afternoon, and our colleagues will be here participating in the events. So we're very glad to help and are eager to help make you have a successful experience.
Thank you, Moni. I just wanted to, again, thank our 4 panelists who shared so much, and as Moni said, are a great resource if you want to chat with them for those who are staying over lunch. And I want to thank James for his opening remarks as well, and Philomena and Todd, who I think have been referenced in everyone's presentation as being awesome, and we co-planned this event together, so I just wanted to acknowledge them, and we'll be here if people have questions for us throughout lunch and the afternoon. And I understand that lunch is being brought in by my colleagues momentarily, so grab a box lunch and feel free to move your chairs around and continue conversation. Thank you again.